And welcome to the RTÉ Rugby podcast after Munster succumbed to Leinster in the Pro 14 final. The last Pro 14 final of this year until the new South African sides come in next year. Leinster winning yet again. Disappointing match, I think, maybe overall, but I guess for Munster supporters, pretty hard to swallow the manner in which they went down to Leinster. Donal, Lenihan, Bernard Jackman, and soon to be Wesley Liddy joining me on the podcast this week. Gents, you're all very welcome. And look, Donal, I guess just to start off with the game itself, we all hoped that Munster would put in a performance to match what they wanted to achieve, which was their first bit of silverware in a long time. It didn't materialise for whatever reason, and the result was that Leinster were really never under that much pressure.
No, I think that's a fair comment. I also think it's a little over the top, having yourself and Bernard in your blue tops. Can I just say that had Munster managed to win, there is no way I'd have dug up a red top to get on this thing.
No. You're the neutral statesman. And to be fair, there's several things I'd rather do than wear a Leinster top around the place. Just gouge my eyes out. So this is not in supporting Leinster, I can tell you.
Anyway, I suppose, look, just to get back to the point, a hugely disappointing performance from Munster. And let's be honest, Leinster didn't have to be anywhere near their best to win it. For me, the most disappointing thing is that Munster just seemed flat and that they were so far off the pace in terms of intensity. Right from the kickoff, there was a mix-up between John Klein and Andrew Conway in terms of calling for the kickoff. And Dave Carney, a great chase, put Munster under pressure. So 8 seconds into the match, Leinster have an attacking line out 15 metres out. It brought me back. I remember we're grasping at straws here, going back to the 06 semi-final in Lansdowne Road. The exact same thing happened. I think Mallow Kelly was lifted early for the kick-off, ball went loose, and Munster were straight into Leinster. And you do get a feel. It's amazing, even in the professional game, you get a feel for things in the first 10 minutes of a match. And just for me, I couldn't believe just how off the pace Munster were. And look, I mean, the bottom line is 10-point differential at the end, despite all the stuff that's been said and written about, there isn't that much of a gap between them. There is. That's the bottom line. And I think Munster, had Leinster had their clinical hat on in terms of finishing, then the result would have been even a far greater defeat.
I think that's the main takeaway, I guess, from the disappointment of a Munster view, Bernard, that Leinster didn't have to play particularly well to win the game, and they were comfortable without actually seeing anywhere near what we know they're capable of. I always measure the gauge of how invested I am in a game of if I'm able to sit there watching it without checking what people are saying on Twitter. But I was on my phone after about 8 or 9 minutes thinking this is going to be a long old game. What did you make of it being there yourself?
Yeah, I think I'm very disappointed in Munster. I thought Munster surely had one big game in them, one big performance in them. It looked like with the way Leinster managed their bench that the opportunity was to start fast and get up a bit of the score pressure. And the reality was, people are talking about their great defence. I mean, they scrambled reasonably well, but Leinster were wasteful. I don't even think it was down to a massively organised defence. And I think what Leinster spotted in them was that they're very narrow in defence, and he saw Leinster going after them in those wide channels. Leinster played with more width than they normally do, and I think Munster were trying to get Joey Carbery into the backfield pretty quickly. We saw when he was in the front field, Leinster targeted him and got some inroads there. And it just seemed to be not on the same page. So the centres would blitz in, but the wingers would drift, and they ended up going back soft again. Leinster were getting easy carry. So, and also, I mean, Johan said after the match, it's a pity it wasn't a dry day. The conditions made it hard to play. I think, having looked at it, if the conditions had been better, Leinster would have went for the jugular, and it could have been a 25, 30 points win. I don't think Munster would benefit at the moment from a dry day. I don't think they're that set up in terms of their attack yet. And to beat Leinster, I don't think they can outplay them. They need to get stuck into them, and they didn't really. I mean, John Klein made some big hits, fair play to him, but the problem is he can't carry the ball well. And the back row, Leinster back row, were absolutely dominant. Bar Coombs, who in fairness put his hand up, but and obviously front row Leinster's front row are just a different class. Even their bench, or whatever way you mix it up, that's the big weakness for Munster. And I think Munster signing another lock is no good to them. They need a big hooker, or they need a big tight head, or bring through Knox or Salnoa.
Wes, if the conditions were better, Munster would have played better and probably won the game.
Obviously, Hugh, you know what I mean? They were very evenly matched, we've been told the last 2 days, you know. So, yeah, I wouldn't agree with that assertion. I didn't think Leinster were poor either. I thought their finishing let them down in a couple of instances, but I thought around the pitch they were excellent. Their composure, their ability to retain possession, I thought was excellent. The first half, there was bits and pieces from Munster. I suppose they were hanging on a bit, but their defence was good, and there was an attempt to kind of launch a little bit in attack, but the second half was borderline pathetic, really, to be honest, I thought.
Yeah, look, I'm just looking there. I just wanted to double check, Donal, when it is Johan van Graan's contract is up. So he recently signed a 2-year extension, which means he's there until at least June 2022. And if you know, Munster fans are probably thinking this week, we're saying, what are we doing here? You know, what's the plan? Look at that team that was out there, and we spoke about this last week. What the Munster side we expected to line out was pretty much to a man what did line out, and that team should be more than capable of putting up to and beating Leinster on a regular basis, not just sporadically once every few years, and putting in performances that are higher than the sum parts of what we saw at the weekend. And you know, you look at Van Graan, and even if you accept, fine, he's not the most experienced head coach in the world. He does have a very good assistant underneath him in Stephen Larkham, who's been there and done it at all levels and coached at the top level. He has Graham Roundtree, who's been there, done that, coaching and played at the top level as well. And you just wonder why things aren't clicking.
Yeah, well, I think your statement, beating them sporadically, I don't think once in 11 games even counts as sporadic. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, you know, I have to say it was almost depressing from the point of view you felt it was now or never for Munster. This was the day in terms of there was more Leinster fellas that played for Ireland's road to Six Nations, more minutes played there. Now Leinster did have the facility to be able to mix and match in terms of leaving some of their internationals like Tadhg Furlong and Johnny Sexton on the bench. Munster went fully locked and loaded in terms of everyone who was available was back. So this was their best team. So, I mean, for them not to fire a shot was incredible. Look, the bottom line is, I think you have to expect Leinster, for me, are the best team in Europe. If you look at the top 4 teams in Europe at the moment, you're looking at Leinster, Toulouse, Racing, Exeter Chiefs. Okay? Mm-hmm. And of those, I would put Leinster number 1. I would expect Leinster. I know they've a reasonably tough draw, but I could see them winning the Champions Cup again this year. Munster, I mean, it's like Man City and Man United. Like Man United aren't anywhere near Man City. Munster aren't anywhere near Leinster, and it comes down to you won't win anything at any level unless you have strength and depth. And Munster, with all the best will in the world, and there is a good crop of young fellas coming in, and I would question the way Munster are developing those young players, and I would question why they need to buy another 6'7" giant of a South African in the second row. And even there, it's not transparent. They're telling us he's a back row and he's been picked to cover for CJ Stander. He's a second row who has played occasionally in the back row. He's not a back row that can play in the second row. And, you know, ball winning hasn't been Munster's problem up to last Saturday. I mean, the bottom line is Munster normally operate off a surfeit of possession, and then they find it difficult to convert that possession into points on the board. They're normally in the 65% plus category in terms of possession. So therefore, when you're down to 36%, as they were last weekend, and down to 29% territory, you've no chance. Then when you miss 35 tackles on top of that, and I agree wholeheartedly with Bernard in terms of, I read Stephen Larkham this morning talking about our defence was great. Our scramble defence was great. Munster missed 35 tackles. They were opened up in midfield with Dialande and Farrell there. They were opened up at ease. Like scramble defence, I suppose it's a reflection on a work ethic and all that, which is never brought into question. And Munster, they did scramble well. But you have to say, like Rory O'Loughlin had 2 poor passes at one stage in the first half that could have been scoring passes. So, I mean, you have to question what's happening. There is quality players there, but there hasn't. It's a bit like Ireland to the extent that we were talking all along. There hasn't been the progression in attack that you would have hoped to have seen. And I agree in terms of Like, I think Roundtree has done a brilliant job. I have spoken to the players there. They absolutely love him, and he's bringing in. And I think a testimony of to where he is will come in the next year or two when you see, has he the facility to bring on the likes of Knox and Salanoa and Liam O'Connor, Josh Wycherley, these young props, because Munster need that. They need more dynamic fellas in there now. But the disappointment has been attack. I mean, we Munster bought a World Cup winning midfielder. You've seen Chris Farrell can look, at international level, he's looked really good. But that combination hasn't worked. In fact, I thought Chris Farrell, some of his passing, particularly off his left hand, was really poor the last day. And you have to be on position when you're playing against Leinster. But the bottom line is the quality that Leinster have. I mean, the back row that started. Ruddock, every day. We're talking about Ruddock now for a number of years. He's an outstanding player who hasn't got the return he deserves in terms of Ireland caps. Ruddock, Van der Fleer, Conan played that Munster back row off the pitch, with the exception of young Coombs. Yes. The backup for that, you could say, Will Connors, Dan Levy, Cahill Doris as your second back row as of now. Mother of God. Behind them, Josh Murphy, Max Deegan, Scott Penny. I mean, it's phenomenal. Yeah. Then you have to add, I suppose we're all wiser with the benefit of hindsight. CJ Stander, I thought, when you look back at the international week he had, he was obviously, the emotional draining with all the thing about retirement and the game against England. He was off the pace. Ty Byrne was running on fumes. Like, when you look at his work rate throughout the Six Nations, but they're all excuses. In the overall context, Munster, particularly from attacking perspective, they haven't improved their game. And you can be brilliant against some of the teams in the Pro 14, but we know, by and large, that's a complete and utter waste of time. And in no other season more so than this particular in this particular season. So I have to say, from that point of view, I was really, really disappointed with Munster's performance. Like, Leinster are a better side, but on a day like a final, with so much at stake, you feel, okay, you're going to lift your game to such a level. Maybe Leinster may not be at that level. Maybe they'll have an eye on Toulon next Friday night, but that didn't happen. And for that, you have to say, Cullen and Lancaster manage their whole, and look at with that depth of squad, trying to keep everybody happy is an almost impossibility, but they're managing to do it. So you have to say, in terms of their coaching and their management setup, they're streets ahead of where Munster are at the moment.
Just coming on that, Hugh, I absolutely agree with Donal 100%, and Leinster should be lauded. But I think we're going to have lots of opportunities to talk about Leinster a lot before the end of the season. This pod, there's a chance they could win 4 trophies in a season, which would be incredible. But I think Munster have lost what they were always good at, which was Cup rugby and semi-finals, finals, and that's the frustrating thing. And I understand. I think it's forgivable that they're not at the same level as Leinster over the course of the season because of Leinster's depth. But once they get into semi-finals, finals, they need to be better. And I think this squad and Johan could potentially be in the firing line now. But I mean, Razzie couldn't get him to win a semi-final. Rob Penny wasn't good enough. Axel wasn't good enough for this group of players or whatever. And at some stage you have to either change the players. I mean, and also, like, Leinster had a dip in 2000 when Joe left. They had a bit of a dip for 2 years, and Scarlets, Glasgow, and Connacht managed to win titles. Do you know what I mean? So John Muldoon made sure his legacy in Connacht was he got him to the holy grail for them, which was a Pro 14. Glasgow's leaders made sure that they had one moment or 1 year where they won silverware. Ken Owens in Scarlets. This Munster generation, from 2010 to 2021, they have let a lot of opportunities slip. Because when you get to knockout rugby, it's about 80 minutes. It's not about your depth in your squad. Number 33 to 40 doesn't matter. And I think Johan, yeah, obviously there's question marks about him, but I think some of the senior players, and I saw Sexton come off the bench, and there was a bad pass to Joey Carberry, and Johnny committed himself 100% to try and lay down a marker. And he's your captain. He's your oldest player. He's your fellow who's played, the most minutes, the most injury prone as such. And yet he's willing to come on and really show what it means to him. And if I look at Munster's leaders, Keith didn't have a great game. Keith Earls, Peter obviously got injured early, but what we saw wasn't like he was going to have a massive game. CJ was quiet, and I understand maybe emotionally he wasn't there, and Connor was very quiet. So Munster aren't going to beat Leinster with their 4 talismen being quiet, I don't think. And that's the question now. That's the question more so for me over Johan at the moment.
He's a very quiet man, Johan. I've met him a few times. I've interviewed him a few times. He's very understated. And that doesn't mean, Wes, that he can't get the players up to a pitch for the game. And it's ultimately up to the players, I think, to get to the level they need to be at to compete. They're professionals. They're playing day in, day out. But I guess the overriding question is about what's happening. Donal mentioned the attack from Munster. What's happening there? The last coach that, for me anyway, that had a significant impact on changing or attempting to change Munster's style of play and attack was Rob Penny, and he was cut short during his time. I saw he was sacked this week as well, so maybe he's not the greatest example to use, but certainly you could see that Rob Penny was trying to change the way Munster were playing. A bit like Andy Farrow so far with Ireland, up until the England game, you kind of wonder what it is that Johan van Graan is doing with this Munster team. What is it that he wants to implement? What's the style that he wants to impose on the players?
I think what Birch is saying is bang on. I think there probably has been too much blame on the coaches. I think this generation of players, like that old team that won the 2 Heineken Cup, started to disassemble in 2010 roughly. And the new group was Dave Kilcoyne, Mike Sherry, O'Mahony, Zebo, Felix Jones, Danny Barnes, loads of Tommy O'Donnell. Some guys are still there, some guys are long gone. But all right, the talent maybe wasn't the same as the previous generation, but the bottom line is look where they've gone from in 2010 to where they've gone now. And I think, I don't know, I think some guys' whole careers in a red jersey probably need to be reappraised in the sense of, you're not trying to be personal about it or anything, but I suppose some of them have become quote unquote legends, spoken of in the same way that Quinny and Wally and Leamy and all those guys are. And when you stop and look at it, you kind of go, well, where's that comparison come from? Because there's no comparison between what the two groups have achieved. So that'd be one thing. As far as the attack and the skills go, I think Leinster, Munster had a phase where they were desperately trying to get back into the game, the 62nd minute. It was the first time I noticed them building up the phases in the whole game. They went 13 phases. They were gone backwards by the end of it. As each phase went by, you were just waiting for a mistake to happen. There was no ability to look comfortable in possession beyond 1 or 2 phases. And I think that's the product of, I think Leinster's superiority there is the product of years of work at all levels of the system, not just this current squad. So, and it's not that there's not good work going on in Munster underage or anything, but it's like Leinster do have that ability to create these very competitive, ruthless environments at every stage of the development process because of those numbers they have. But you can't keep throwing that out as an excuse. You have to find your own way to tackle that. And to me, it's almost a little pointless talking about dropping kickoffs or giving away penalties because, like you mentioned the word sporadic a while ago, until there's a whole host of issues tackled away from the field, there's never going to be even sporadic victories. And I would have no faith any of these will be addressed. And I think things will either stay the same or get worse.
Donal, it's amazing to me that Danny Barnes was let slip through the crack. Every game that Frankie Sheehan and I commentated on, he was man of the match consistently, time in, time out. So I'm amazed that Danny Barnes wasn't allowed to stay around in Munster. Look, just on Wes's point there about maybe the players not being good enough. Hodnett, Coombs, Ahern, Casey, Crowley, Healy, Salanoa, Wycherley, Knox. There are a host of young players coming through now. Is the time now to just say, look, lads, we need to change here. We need to bring in these young guys. We need to stick with them. We need to implement a new squad based around these young players. And that's the plan that Munster needs to entail. Is it too simple to say that?
I don't think it's not too simple, but I mean, it has to be a process that is managed properly. And that's where I see the difficulty here. I mean, Thomas Ahorn is a young player that we've been speaking about now for 2 or 3 seasons. We've seen him play for Ireland at under 20s level. We know he's a phenomenal athlete. We know he can do things that, well, I won't say other second rows can't do.
Well, Devin Toner can't, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, well, no, but I tell you, he can do the things that are almost becoming the norm for the modern day second row to do. I mean, you saw Ryan Baird coming off the bench. First thing he did, goes in, he strips CJ Stander. His athleticism, his ability to chase the restart in Scotland, all of those things. Ahern can do those things. He's now 21, 22 years of age. He should be a regular starter. It's certainly in 50, 60% of the Pro 14 matches. I think, you know, I know where Wes is coming from in terms of going back to the team of the noughties and all that. That's a different generation. We have to move on from that. And, you know, I mean, the current crop must be, shit sick of living in their shadow. But the bottom line is, as Bernard quite rightly says, they've done nothing about it. I mean, the record of failure, and let's be honest, they've lost 3 Pro 14 finals since 2015. They've lost 5 semi-finals, and they've lost 7 semi-finals in Europe since they were last in a Heineken Cup final. I mean, it is, and it becomes endemic. I mean, you're there, you get to a point, and there seems to be a psychological barrier there somewhere. There's no doubt about that. And I think the point Bernard made about Cup Rugby is absolutely right. And that is the one thing that the team of the noughties were brought up on in terms of All-Ireland League and Munster Cups and playing for your club and all that. And it's a different generation, I know, and you move on. But there is issues in terms of what's happening in Munster and in terms of the way, like, there's a lot of good development stuff that's been done. We've all spoken about the growth and the crop of young fellas that have come out of West Cork. That should be in addition to what you already have. But what the pluses you're getting from that are being more than offset by the losses that you have from, what we've spoken about before. No Limerick forwards. Dave Kilcoyne, again, the only one in the matchday squad. Bottom line is, the Munster team that started on Saturday, only 7 of them have come through the Munster system. The other 8 have either come through Leinster, South Africa, or somewhere else. But I mean, like, that is a concern for me, and it's something that Munster don't seem to be addressing in the layers underneath the professional game. The easy solution is to keep going away and buying a Jason Jenkins, but that's not going to solve Munster's problems long term. And look, maybe that's a debate for another day. But
Donal, is that debate happening? Like, that's I'd hate to see Munster slip away, and like, we can have a bit of slagging and joking, but realistically, it's not really a rivalry at the moment. It's just not. It's not.
You got to win at least 30-40% of the game.
So, but I mean, do people in Munster realise that they're at a tipping point now where they either address the issues that have got them into this situation and try and catch up, or if they trick themselves and believe everything will be okay, Jason Jenkins come in next year, RG Snyman will be back. Leinster might, the Johnny Sexton, we might
listen.
Are they
the honest answer? The honest answer to that is no. I'll give you one fundamental. I think I might have mentioned it in this thing before. It drives me bananas. We're the only province in Ireland that has a North Munster branch and a South Munster branch. Now, I'm a club president in Cork Con, so I have a fair idea of what's going on at club level and in the politicking at branch level. And it just fills me with frustration. I mean, there's a suggestion, you have the 1A and 1B clubs, and then you have the second division clubs, and it's almost one against the other when it comes to voting and trying to do anything that's progressive. Under 20s rugby in in Munster is a disaster. You get a nice group of young kids coming out of school and you try and build your 20s, you put a good coaching structure in there, and then you're lucky if these guys get 4 or 5 games a year. Is it any wonder they give up? I mean, I'd keep it for another day, but I mean, it just got so bad about 2 or 3 years ago. And wouldn't be the top under-20 team. UCC would be by far and away for obvious reasons. They have a good influx of good young kids. They're well organised. But we just got fed up of our players not getting any matches. Teams crying off on a Friday night. And we had applied to get into Leinster to play in the under-20 system in Leinster. Things got so bad. We were actually passed by the Munster Professional Board, and it was pulled by the Rugby Committee. But I mean, it's symptomatic of what's happening in Munster. And unless people work together, put up their hands and say we have problems, then all that is happening at the layer underneath the professional game. And you can't keep going to Leinster and bringing in an Andrew Conway and a Tyg Byrne and these guys. We're absolutely thrilled to have them there, and those players have been brilliant for Munster. But you've got to get your own foundations right. And there's no question for me that there has been almost an acceptance because Munster have been there or thereabouts, but we're not addressing the fundamental issues that are happening underneath that professional layer. And that is hugely important because Munster, there's a different model in place. Munster don't have the schools feeder setup that Leinster have. So therefore, you've got to work, and the work that's been done by clubs in West Cork and producing those players and schools. And you can see the benefit of it. Reggie Son, the assistant coach who was in Toulouse, who's now gone on to Bordeaux, the work that he did, that model of a school and a club working together, he generated a skill levels in the likes of the Jack Crowleys and that Bandon Grammar School. Like, that is the model for how you can affect change. But listen,
Donal, for what Jason Jenkins is being paid, you'd speculate they could probably bring in 3 coaches with the same profile as Reggie Son and put them in 3 identified hotspots in the province where you can double up with a school or a club or multiple clubs. Like, I'd happily throw in an academy player in a couple of Pro 14 games and lose him to get that level of development 5 years down the track. Is that a fair point?
I couldn't agree more. Listen, we still have the same 2 schools in Cork when I was playing, Pres and Christians. Do you know what I mean? Bandon now have come up to that A level, but there's been very little progress in those areas. But as I keep going back, we can't rely on the schools model. We have a different setup here. Young fellas down in Munster, they play a lot more, say, Gaelic football and hurling and rugby. They tend to play a whole host of different sports up to a specific age, and that works for them because their skill levels and their, they have skills that fellas who only played rugby and nothing else from the age of 10 don't have. So therefore, we have to adjust the model to suit the resources and the quality that we have, but we're not doing that. And I just find it incredibly frustrating because I see some of the things that are happening, and it just drives me bananas.
How do you solve this, Bert? I mean, look, this is something that if they start fixing it now, if they address the issues that Donal has outlined there, Munster now behind the scenes, this is something that we probably won't see a return on for about 5 or 6 years. That's the reality. If that's how far they are behind now.
Look, and I think they're very lucky that even despite the obviously issues that are there, they do actually have a crop. And it's happened, like, they haven't had a crop for the last 5 or 6 years, which has obviously led to some players getting, 10 months of jersey that maybe they wouldn't have before. But there actually does look like there's a crop now. The Tom Ahorns, the Jack Crowleys, the Ben Healy's, the Flannerys, the Hodnetts, Jack O'Sullivan, etc. That are there. I actually think they need to fast track them. They need to fast track them and get a group of them together who maybe can become, the senior group in the next 3 or 4 years. Because look at what we've all seen them at under 20s level. They are talented kids. They were as good under 20s level as the Leinster cohort.
They're as good as the English, the French. We saw them beat these teams. They are phenomenally talented players.
So look at that's one thing. You're lucky you have that because I think it's just, I'm not sure it was down to system, but they're there now. Whatever, they need to be brought through. But then obviously they need to look at how you can create that type of group year on year, or at least 2 or 3 players who can make that step up. And not even 2 or 3, maybe 1 a year is enough. Like one good player coming through will be enough. But I think,
but Bert, when we're talking, like, it's not 5 or 6 years. The bottom line is, with those players, and that there is a talented group coming through, like, but still with all the faults, they're making the semi-finals and finals in Europe, or quarterfinals in Europe, semi-finals or final in Pro 14. There's clubs all over the place would give their IT to have that level of consistency. So the bottom line is, they're not a million miles away.
No.
So it's wrong to paint the picture like that. Oh, geez, everything is doom and gloom. They're making finals. They're making semi-finals. They went away to Claremont. Look at that game. For me, I thought that was the day. This was the turning point. This was like, there were 20 plus points down at one stage, and with a mixture of brilliant play, hanging in there. JJ Hanrahan, he obviously, like, he's going to Claremont. That day obviously influenced Claremont to such a degree. If you remember, I think he was 9 from 9 off the tee. He's got a new contract out of that. So they're not a million miles away. But this program with these young fellas and bringing them on has to run parallel to that. And then you bring in your 2 or 3 quality, like your Sneemans and your Dialande, who make the difference to every club. But I agree, there is those talented guys there. But throwing them in one game, 4 or 5, and then, they mightn't play a game then for 3 or 4 weeks. That's another issue. I mean, the COVID thing certainly has stifled the development of a whole load of those young fellas. I mean, you mentioned Jack Crowley. He might have got 3 games as a 10 in the last 9 months. I mean, no, that's true. That's true. Nobody's fault, but it doesn't help the scenario.
Yeah. Toulouse this weekend for Munster. Birch, look, it'd be just like Munster to go out and put in a performance this weekend, wouldn't it, when everyone has written them off and said they haven't got a chance. But it's very hard to see them being a very, very strong Toulouse side.
No, historically, I would have said, there'd be a massive backlash. But I don't know, I'm losing faith in their ability to get up for games, given how poor they were against Leinster, where it should have been red hot. So look, it is Europe. They obviously, Europe's a huge part of Munster's heritage. Toulouse are a standard team, and Toulouse themselves just come off a poor performance against Montpellier, where their breakdown work was terrible, and that's an area of the game that Munster are strong. So yeah, you could definitely pick out moments from last weekend's Toulouse game against Montpellier and say Munster have an advantage there. But I think across the field, in terms of X factor, in terms of cohesion, power, Toulouse are going to be. Look, they're not going to roll away. They're not going to walk away with it. But I think Toulouse are going to be too good for that.
Okay, and before you go, I know because you're up against with time, just Toulon on Friday night. Would you expect Leinster to overcome a significantly weaker Toulon than the side that last won the European Cup?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think when everyone saw these fixtures, we don't have access to top 14 rugby in Ireland live. If people think Toulon are the same team that were winning European Cups, they're far from it. They still have some big name players, like some Estebet, Manonu, but he'll be suspended. A couple of good French players, Lenihan, Serra, Carbonneau, 10, but they're all over the place. They're pretty poor. Now there might be a reaction. They're coached by Calazo, used to be La Rochelle, Gloucester. He's an old-fashioned coach. There may be a reaction to chipping 50 points against Lyon, but I think Leinster will be way fitter, way better across the field, and that's a match that looks harder on paper than it actually probably will be. Okay, Birch, thanks many for your time. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week. It's just for Munster this weekend in Toulouse. I don't know if any or many changes will be made this weekend. But I'd love to see some of the younger guys come in. It's probably not the time to do it now if Van Gran hasn't had that philosophy for the season. To be fair, so I don't know. Munster put their strongest team out, and I hope that it'll be enough to back and beat Toulouse this weekend. What do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't anticipate a lot of changes, to be honest. There's almost an element of who cares, like, in a sense, because I mean, coming back and rallying with this big fight and one performance might actually be masking a few things going forward. But look, when you get to the day of the game, obviously you'll be very eager to win as always. But I don't think they're in a place to seriously look at winning the European Cup. So I mean, that's what you're kind of aspiring to. But as far as the young players go, I think maybe this, hopefully, if it happens, this Rainbow Cup with a run of 6-7 games, you just commit to playing 4 or 5 of these guys in each of those games, with the notion that they're ready to hit the ground running next season.
Why do you think it is that Van Graan can't see what everybody else is able to see? I mean,
I think sometimes it's what we can't see either. Like, he does see them training every day. There is a lot of work-ons to do to become the complete package, but it's almost like they need them to be the complete package before they put them in, rather than, some of getting to that place is stuff you learn in a game as opposed to training. So I think you can learn so much, and then you have to be trusted. So it's just kind of judging that correctly. But yeah, they probably are quite conservative, even though they would throw stats at you that they're the amount of players they've given a debut to, etc. But they could probably do a little bit more in terms of giving guys their head in terms of game time.
Yeah, Donal, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think that, like, they'll cite the fact they played, oh God, it's a 54, 5 or 6 fellas in the Pro 14, but as we've said, some of those games were a waste of time. The bottom line is sometimes we only throw the fella in, when it's desperation. You look at Josh Wycherley. He, there was an injury crisis at Loosehead. They had no option but to throw him in against Claremont away, up against Rabah Slimani, one of the greatest tight heads of all time. He gets absolutely milled in the first scrum, but he hangs in there and he finds a way to fight and to get himself back to the point where he ended up 2 scrum penalties, which opened the way for Munster to get back into that game. Like, we haven't seen him since one or 2 outings. Do you know what I mean? And that's the frustrating thing for me. And do you know what? I'm a bit with Wes. I made the point there at the time we didn't know what was going to happen with the Heineken Cup, because rounds 3 and 4 had been cancelled, and I suppose going away to Claremont was a daunting task. I made a point that maybe Munster might have been better off not qualifying into the Champions Cup, given the way that it worked out, because they might have a great chance of winning the Challenge Cup. And having that opportunity to win a trophy might be just a little bit of a kickstart that they need. But look, they qualified, in fairness, and but you're playing a Toulouse side. I mean, to me, to be fair, the opportunity, and I'm lucky we're doing the game on RTÉ radio, but for me, the opportunity once again to see the likes of DuPont and Entomac, but most especially Chelsea and Colby up close and in the flesh, that's the most exciting thing for me. I mean, it's probably one of those games, given what happened last weekend, when Munster would have needed the 26,000 packed Thomond Park, coming out the tunnel, the lift that gives you, everybody just doing everything to try and get behind the team. But that's not going to be there. So they're going to have to rely on themselves. And, you look at the quality Toulouse has, the front row alone, Cyril Bay and Jean Marchand were regular starters at Loosehead and hooker for France and the Six Nations, and you've Charlie Famuina at tight head. They're a quality team. So look, it is going to be a difficult one for Munster, but a lot of it is going to come down to what's happening in the head. The worry I have, the likes of a Tadhg, who has been so outstanding. I just thought he really looked as if he was running on empty. And these games are just coming thick and fast. You win this weekend, you could be going to Claremont or Wasps. So it's a difficult one, but I think it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is. Is it in them?
Okay, just to finish up, lads, a couple of quick stories. Wes, you sent on a story to me yesterday, which I hadn't seen myself, about the New Zealand former captains, including the current captain Sam Cane, but I think more than half a dozen of them are threatening to block this proposed move by the New Zealand Rugby Union to bring in private equity group Silver Lake in a deal that they reckon is around about 465 million New Zealand dollars. So the players themselves, the All Blacks captains, feel that the deal won't be progressive for New Zealand rugby, that it will basically inhibit the game as far as fan relationships with New Zealand, and also it'll impact as well on the safety of the Maori and the Pacifica game. So all these things combined mean they are saying that they will not support the deal. I know the New Zealand Rugby Union are supposed to vote on it next week. On the back of the CVC deal here, I guess it's interesting to see their take, the players' take, that this, just because New Zealand Rugby might be very much appreciative and could need the money, doesn't mean that the players believe it's the best thing for the game itself. And in the context of the CVC deal, which last week I should add as well, did suggest that they want to keep a free-to-air element of the Six Nations going, which obviously for the likes of BBC, ITV, RTÉ, Virgin would be good news. I just thought it was an interesting reaction by the players.
Yeah, very much so. I suppose what they're saying is certain elements of the All Blacks culture are very much belonging to Maori and Pacific Islander culture. I mean, the haka being an obvious one, but that these things aren't for sale, really. Whether that's naive or there's a PR component to that, who knows? But it could actually be quite far-sighted in terms of, you know, they've specifically mentioned not damaging the relationship between the rugby public and, you know, the wider public and the All Blacks, and you know, that is the most important thing at the end of the day. And I suppose they haven't gone too concrete in their statement, but they've said their belief that, you know, that money can be raised through other sources, and if it can, or if some portion of it can, that's enough to get by, and they preserve that integrity of the All Blacks. It's a great move. Now, there's others would argue the All Blacks sold out commercially a long time ago. So I guess it's where you want to fall on that side of the fence. Really.
Well, the AIG shirt sponsorship deal was the beginning of that, wasn't it? And you know, I think once that was struck, I think New Zealand kind of lost whatever moral high ground they could afford to take on these sponsorship deals. As regards to CBC, Donal, last week was the first time that I'd heard CBC comment about the free-to-air element of the Six Nations, and I was surprised genuinely. Everything that I had been led to believe about the deal they were going to conduct was going to be something like an Amazon deal, a private pay-per-view deal with the Six Nations. But it does seem now that they recognise, to give them their due, they recognise the importance of keeping rugby available to the masses in some form so that people can watch the game.
Yeah, I think, look, it's encouraging to see that rugby as a sport is willing to learn from the mistakes of others. You know, we spoke about Formula One and cricket in particular, who both went behind the paywalls, and how they just lost the audiences massively in the UK in particular. To be fair to Philip Brown, the CEO of the RFU, when he was questioned about this, he seemed quite bullish at the time that it didn't mean automatically that the Six Nations would be going behind the paywall. So they obviously had spoken about this in advance. But I think a lot of it is to do...
I wouldn't be surprised if they don't go behind the paywall this time, and then the rights are worth more when they do go behind the paywall in 2 or 3 cycles' time to ultimately sell it at a bigger profit, which is their goal.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting. I mean, maybe it's, as you say, it's, you know, just stick your toe in the water for a little bit first. And I think they've been lucky in that the partner, it looks as if the potential partner for the pay-per-view is Amazon, as opposed to a BT or a Sky, who would be looking for exclusivity within themselves, number one. But secondly, Amazon seem to be quite happy. It looks as if it could be the November series. What was the Autumn Nations Cup, when you'll have the teams now will be added coming up from the Southern Hemisphere next year. It looks as if more of that particular competition may go behind the paywall. Amazon are quite happy with that because they're promoting themselves in the build-up to Christmas. Obviously, a huge time for them to promote their wares. So maybe there is an element of suck it and see, and it is only a 4-year cycle. So, and I think if you jump from one ship straight into the other, then you would be asking for major trouble. So yeah, it's interesting. Look, obviously we're biased on this. We want to see a terrestrial television element there, whether it is RTÉ or Virgin or whoever. But there's no question for me if they went behind that paywall. The audience, I mean, they've been averaging, is it 8.7, 8.8 million a match for BBC or ITV when they cover those games. They'd be lucky to get 500,000 or 600,000 if it goes behind the paywall. And that's the difference. It's massive. Young fellas, young kids, they have to have heroes to aspire to. And if you can't see it on the telly, then that's a major issue. And to be fair, you go back to your New Zealand thing. I wouldn't be as au fait with the deal that the capital or the venture capitalists down there were offering. But it's interesting that in order for that deal to go through, the interested parties that have to vote, every union in New Zealand, that's just not the top Super Rugby franchises, that's every rugby union. So you're talking about the Manawatu's, the Hawke's Bays, the counties, Manakoo, and all these. They all have a vote. So
You have to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, well, there's an understanding about who the ownership, who is the union, who is the RFU. The RFU at the end is made up of all the clubs. What club in Ireland had any say in whether CVC should get a share in the Six Nations? It goes back to France. We spoke about something very straightforward, you would have thought. The French Rugby Union looking to have an overseas head coach for the first time. But all the clubs, amateur and professional, had to vote on it. And the club said, no way. We won't have an overseas coach. So there is that element of ownership. Certainly, we've seen New Zealand and France fight for their clubs having the say, whereas the clubs have no say whatsoever in Ireland in terms of what's happening in the professional game.
It's an important point, Hugh. We've touched on it before, but it speaks to the primacy of the game in New Zealand as well, that people do feel they have to have a say and have to be listened to. Whereas, Birch mentioned a while ago about, do people realise they're at a tipping point when he was talking about Munster? But I think rugby in this country gets a huge free ride in terms of accountability to the public, particularly.
In terms of the IRFU and I guess the lack of transparency, is it, or
yeah, I think they can. I think they can operate more or less as they please in terms of making decisions that affect their members, like be they TV rights or ticketing pricing or all number of things. Like they get away with things the GAA wouldn't get away with in a million years, and it's done under the premise sometimes of it's a professional sport, we have to pay the bills, but they're also a grassroots organization, so it's a very fine line to me between what's acceptable and what's not. And I think even in terms of the media coverage, I think they get an unbelievably soft ride compared to GAA or soccer.
Yeah, probably a fair point. Something maybe we might go back into again. Okay, European rugby to look forward to this weekend, lads. We'll be back next week to dissect Munster Toulouse, hopefully a little bit more positively, and Leinster Toulon as well. Connacht and Ulster both in action in the Challenge Cup. Thanks for your time this week, as always, to Donal, to Wes, and to Bernard. We will talk to you next week. Have a good one.